The 80s were the golden age for horror and practical effects. Some would even say that was probably the greatest decade for horror. Studios pumping in money for the next big slasher movie or creature feature, from The Thing to The Fly. Many classics come to mind when I think of the 80s for horror movies. And this was the time for groundbreaking effects in movies. There's just something about practical effects that I love in movies, especially horror movies. They're more visceral, disturbing. Maybe because it's just like a real object. And the use of just like this thing there kind of brings you into that movie or that experience even more. Don't get me wrong, CG has come a long way. But for me, when it comes to horror movies, it kind of misses that realness. And there's always something off about how it looks. Now, I love creature movies. I am a creature fanatic. I make a lot of creatures in my off time for fun. So I had a thought the other day. I wanted to find an 80s horror movie, possibly a creature movie, that I've never seen before. And I did. I came across one called The Deadly Spawn. Now, it's a low-budget creature feature movie from, I think, 1982. Way back in the day. That's like 10 years ago. And I wasn't really sure what to expect from this movie, but the poster for this movie drew me in. Giant worms, sharp teeth. Hell yes. So I bring it up, hit play, and sat down to watch it. After about an hour and a half sitting there, I was kind of pleasantly surprised by this movie. Now, by no means was this like a big budget blockbuster movie. This was a simple story with a creature killing people in good old-fashioned 80s schlock. Fake blood, puppets, strings and wires. It's the type of movie that you put on a rainy day, turn your mind off, and just kind of enjoy the silliness of this silly sci-fi horror movie. Before we jump in, if you do enjoy this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. New videos are posted weekly, as well as live streams over on Twitch, Metal's Horror House, every Wednesday and Friday. Link will be down in the description below. So let's jump into this movie. The story from this movie is a really straightforward one. Something falls from the sky, crashing to earth. Two campers see this happening, so they think to themselves, well, you know what we should do? We should grab our camera and go out there and capture whatever fell from the sky. They go to check in on it. A mysterious glow is filling the atmosphere, reflecting off their faces. And now these campers want to capture this moment to remember it by, so one of them runs back to grab the camera, while the other one stays there. But something comes from the meteor, and they end up getting eaten by this thing. You're left in suspense of what it is. You don't really see it. You see blood being splattered on some glasses, a hand outreached from the tent, grabbing onto the pole, blood dripping down, and munching sounds and splatter sounds coming from the monster feeding. Now, you don't see it, but you do get to see its shadow, feeding your curiosity of, what is this thing? Then it opens. The Deadly Spawn, in terrific 80s fashion, of course. Gotta have the synth in there. After the opening scene, we are introduced to the family of this movie, of the story. They are in a secluded house, I think a farmhouse, pretty sure, where they are unaware of this creature had snuck in through the basement window and now is living beneath them in the basement, and is slowly growing into a monstrous beast. Most of this movie solely takes place in the house itself, and some parts in the surrounding area and in another house as well. And on a rainy day. Let me tell you, this is a rainy day kind of movie. And we see this family, the mom, the dad, two brothers, and an aunt and uncle who are there on vacation, I believe, just to kind of like get away from things. And honestly, it doesn't take too long for things to kind of get going in this movie, to really get into the bloodshed. And it grabs you from the opening, and it doesn't really slow down much. As the next scene, spoilers ahead, we see the mom and dad brutally eviscerated, chomped on, devoured by this creature very early in the movie. But it also does a really good job of building up suspense in this movie. What does this creature look like? What does it want? Does it want anything? But I also love movies that just go for it. You know what? Let's just open with a banger. Let's just murder a couple people with this monster to really set the tone. And they set the tone. And over time, this monster gets bigger and bigger, and there is no shortage of kills in this movie. Let me tell you that. And the kills themselves, some of them are pretty brutal and good old classic 80s horror. Now, the practical effects in this movie are actually really good. I was kind of surprised after watching this because I wasn't really expecting that. I threw this movie on expecting just some lame effects, some terrible acting, very B, which, you know, I do enjoy those kind of movies, but in a different way. So when I saw this movie and the work they put into the practical effects, I was kind of like, wow, like, kind of blown away by it. I was literally sitting there smiling like, wow, that is a great face rip. Now, this movie is not a deep movie by any means. It's not going to make you think too hard about the choices that some of these characters make in the movie. Some of them are dumb, some of them are smart. From one of the main characters, Charles, who's a 12-year-old boy who just loves horror movies and creatures and special effects. When he's finally face to face with his creature, his smarts kick in. And honestly, he's kind of like the only smart one in this movie, to a certain degree, since he uses his knowledge from horror movies that he's watched over the years. But it is a movie you would expect from the 80s. Some dumb characters that do wind up dead. But it also takes time to build on the characters themselves, like the aunt and uncle. So you learn that Charles' parents kind of worry about him because he's into the horror movie stuff. You know, they think he's kind of a little bit weird. It may be a phase. It's not a phase. But the aunt thinks that he's expressing himself and loves what he's doing, and she's really supportive of his love for horror movies and practical effects. The uncle, well, he's a little bit more on the iffy side, since he's a psychologist, but he does have more of an open mind and kind of finds Charles a little bit fascinating, to the point where he wants to talk to Charles about his passion for horror. Maybe use his findings and this discussion that he has with Charles in his upcoming conference that he's going to attend. And it does build the characters up enough to where you kind of start to like them, which is kind of a change to where you have a set group of characters in a horror movie usually, and you really don't like any of them, and you kind of look forward to, you know, these people just getting slaughtered somehow, right? You're excited for the kills because you don't really have any attachment to them. And you hope they die because they kind of suck as characters, right? This movie, though, it didn't make me feel that way. I like the characters in this movie, and I was kind of rooting for them, and I don't really think I hated any of them. So secretly, I was rooting for the monster, okay? Like I said, there's some good moments in this movie. Makes you stop to like some of these characters, but it also has some dumb moments in it to where it brings you back. You're like, oh yeah, this is an 80s horror movie. There's going to be some dumb moments in it. It really reminded me of like Critters or Gremlins a little bit, possibly a little more gory, with some little cheesy moments sprinkled in. After Charles, the rest of the family is pretty likable, like I said. You have Pete, who's like a science major, he's in school. You have the aunt and uncle who care for the kids as well, they're pretty likable. The mom and dad, well, you don't see much because they get off pretty quickly in the opening act. You meet some friends of Pete's, and then you also meet some other people's side characters as well. Yeah, the character is pretty good. And I have to say as well that the build up to the monster, to seeing this creature, does pay off. Because you really don't see this thing until about, I think, halfway maybe into the movie. You get a little glimpse of it, and then you get a big glimpse of it. It's really good because each scene, you see a little bit more of it. You see a shadow here, shadow there. Maybe a row of teeth in the next scene, as well as the gore ramps up where it's blood splatter being thrown on glasses or against a wall to like literal faces just being ripped off. Then the reveal happens of these monsters and you're like satisfied. It's a very pleasant payoff. Now these creatures are a fast breeding worm-like organism with just like rows of teeth. Now there isn't just one, but there are multiple variations of these worms, since the main monster is a queen monster and has little baby worms, and those things also start to crawl around and grow a little bit throughout the movie. And you find out that they are also attracted to sound. The creature is pretty well designed. I think they used a series of rubber and it was controlled by unseen wire. And having that practical creature where you can like see the slime and the teeth and the blood dripping out of the mouth and the grossness of its body, to also the real reactions of the actors to this thing rather than just like tennis balls, kind of adds like an extra layer to the movie. I don't know, maybe it was just me. The design is something you expect from Queen Monster Worm from outer space. And they even animated the little worm slithering around in the water and up the walls. They did a really good job. But of course, like good old 80s, you know, some of the scenes are pretty cheesy. Some shots were probably harder to do back then. But that cheesiness also plays into the comedy of the movie a little bit. Like there's this one scene that kind of had me howling, where the aunt has to help her mom with this dinner party. And all these other old ladies come over and they start eating these foods to have a good time, unaware of these like little worms slithering up the drain pipe. and infesting this house. Even one point, they accidentally drink or eat one of the worms, but they're eventually attacked by these worms. These worms are like sticking to their faces, just kind of flopping there, and they're crawling up the walls and yelling at them. And these old ladies are just like running around the living room, like what the hell is happening? Worms are in the house, and it's just goofy as all hell. But I think that's where the charm comes into this movie. This movie is not too long. It knows what it is. It doesn't deviate from the story. It's a simple creature feature that doesn't stray away from itself. And it doesn't try and do anything too crazy with the story. Though the crazy part of this movie, I would say, is probably the ending. So, spoilers. Charles has just killed the queen monster using a prop head and his special effects flash powders. Kablooey, blows it up, saving everyone else that's left in the house. So after multiple deaths and people who have been eaten in this house, the cops come and show up with, I think, a group of other people to help clean up around this area, to get the last remaining little worms and kill them. It shows some people that are still alive and a lot of people who are still in shock from what happened. And it shows you that this is kind of somewhat of a happy ending, I guess, because it could have been a lot worse. And I mean, they all could have been worm food. Literally. But we get a cut to night, and these cops are finishing up cleaning up the worms when they hear a rumbling in the distance, and it gets louder and louder and louder, and the cop is trying to listen to where it's coming from. Then he looks up in shock and screams. We get a long distance shot of the house in this hillside, and a giant worm emerges from the hillside and lets out a giant roar, cutting to black, showing that the threat isn't over. The actual queen that landed from the meteorite was actually still alive. Honestly, what more could you want from a creature feature or a creature movie from the 80s, or a creature movie in general? Practical effects, decent acting, gore, creatures, silliness and cheesiness, and a simple story where you can just throw it on, sit down and turn your mind off and just kind of enjoy the ride. But Deadly Spawn definitely does not get talked about enough after watching this movie. It's a bit of a hidden gem, I'd say. I'd probably put it up there with like The Evil Dead and Gremlins and all those classics from the 80s. I really love this movie, and I would highly recommend that you check it out as well. And as for the sequel, I believe there is one called Metamorphosis: The Alien Factor. I haven't seen it, but I definitely will check it out though. Have you seen this movie? If you have, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Those who haven't, go watch it now. Go watch it, come back, let me know your thoughts as well. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. I put out weekly videos, and as always, I'll see you in the next spooky video.